Hey guys, tonight we're diving into how people found peace at night before bedtime stories in medieval times. Forget cozy fairy tales, candles flickering softly, and grandma tucking you in. Nope. Imagine a world where your bedtime routine involves checking for rats, warding off demons, and hoping your thatched roof doesn't collapse on your face. Before we jump in, if you like weird history, the kind that makes you grateful for electric blankets and Wi-Fi, go ahead and hit that like button. And let me know in the comments, what's your nighttime ritual? Scrolling TikTok till 3 a.m., lighting incense, pretending your bed is a cloud? All right, dim the lights, get comfy under your blanket, and let's time travel into the night. You're in a tiny medieval village. The sun has dipped and shadows stretch long over cobbled paths. You're inside a one-room cottage with walls that do not keep secrets or heat. The thatch above your head groans with mice. The floor below creaks with every breath. There's no Netflix, no Spotify sleep playlists, no bedtime podcasts about stoic philosophy. There's only darkness and your thoughts. Yikes. If you're lucky, you share your bed with a spouse. If you're less lucky, it's a goat. Either way, you're not sleeping alone. Beds were communal. Children, grandparents, sometimes neighbors if they were staying over. No boundaries, no privacy. Just the soft chorus of snoring, farting, and murmured prayers. So how did they relax? Well, brace yourself. It wasn't ASMR or melatonin gummies. It was ritual, routine, and a little bit of superstition. First, evening prayers. You kneel on the cold floor and whisper words half out of faith, half out of fear. Because back then, demons were very real to people. And the night, their playground. Comment below. If you had to say one prayer before bed every night, or risk being possessed by a night hag, would you remember it? Then came protective charms. People hung herbs like rosemary and lavender, not for the vibes, but because they were believed to keep evil away. Think of it as medieval aromatherapy meets demon repellent. They might also place iron near the bed, draw crosses on door frames, or tuck little relics under their pillows. Not because it was cozy, but because the darkness outside wasn't just spooky, it was spiritually dangerous. Close your eyes and imagine it. No streetlights, just blackness and the occasional flicker of a candle. You hear owls screeching like banshees, wolves howling in the forest, the thud of a farmer's boot, maybe someone whispering outside your door, or was that your imagination? Fun fact, people feared silence. Total quiet wasn't peaceful, it was eerie. That's why some villages kept night watchmen, not for crime, that was rare, but to keep folks calm by literally making noise. They sang hymns, banged sticks, or called out the time. It's the midnight hour, rest easy. Imagine if your phone, instead of buzzing with memes, just shouted, go to sleep, every hour. They had something called first sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed not long after sunset, sleep for a few hours, then wake up in the middle of the night. No, not for doom scrolling or checking your ex's Instagram, just because it was normal. During this midnight window, you'd stoke the fire, maybe chat with your bedmate, pray again, have a snack, called a Sega snack, not a joke. Or even go visit neighbors at 2 a.m. in the dark, on purpose. Comment if this would absolutely wreck your circadian rhythm, because same. Then after this mysterious in-between time, people would go back to bed for their second sleep, which lasted till dawn. Now here's where things start to feel familiar. Sometimes if the family wasn't too exhausted, someone, maybe an elder, would tell oral tales. Not once upon a time, but gritty legends, religious parables, or local ghost stories. You sit around the hearth, the flames dancing, the shadows flickering across the walls. The voice in the room lowers. A long time ago, a traveler refused to give a beggar bread. That night, he heard scratching under his bed. You get the idea. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were warnings, cultural lessons, social survival guides. Don't mess with the church. Share your food. Don't wander after dark. Sound familiar? Like how we tell kids today not to talk to strangers or download weird links. Same energy, just with more ghosts. In a life ruled by toil, poverty, and uncertainty, sleep was one of the few free pleasures. That moment when your body went limp, your mind drifted, and the horrors of the day faded. That was peace. That was power. No scrolls, no screens. Just you, the breath of your family nearby, the crackle of a fire, and the hope that morning would come safely. You stir under your blanket of coarse wool. The fire's embers glow dimly now. The night is heavy, thick with breath and shadow. And then, a voice breaks the quiet. It's old Marjorie, toothless but wise, and her voice carries the weight of generations. She leans close to the hearth, spits into the fire for luck, and begins. There was once a knight who ignored the warning of the moon and was eaten by his own shadow. Wait, what? Welcome to the original medieval bedtime story. Spoiler. These weren't Goodnight Moon or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. They were intense, cautionary, sometimes holy, sometimes horrifying, and absolutely not rated PG. You see, bedtime stories weren't really about sleep. They were about survival. These tales were tools, ways to teach morals, explain the unexplainable, and scare children into behaving without needing, modern parenting. Don't talk to strangers. Here's a tale about a boy who did, and was cursed to eat frogs for eternity. Don't go outside at night. There's a forest spirit that steals your name and sells it to demons. These were verbal armor, layered with religious parables, folk tales, pagan myths, and local gossip woven into allegories. Imagine Grimm's fairy tales, but with more lice. The storyteller could be anyone: a grandmother, a farmhand with a flair for drama, a monk visiting the village with tales of saints and sinners, even traveling bards. Imagine a TikTok creator on a donkey with a lute. They told stories for the same reason we do today: to make sense of chaos, to connect with others, to cope with the fear of what comes after you close your eyes. Think about it. In a world with no science books, no therapy, and no nightlights, stories were how people explain life itself. And when you're a child hearing these tales, huddled beside your sibling who keeps elbowing you in their sleep, you don't just remember the words. You remember the flicker of the fire, the smell of hay, the sound of your mother's voice, soft, careful, protective. That's peace, not safety, not luxury, but a fleeting moment where the world feels held together by words. Here's the twist you didn't see coming. Many of these tales were terrifying, but also oddly comforting. Why? Because the monsters had rules. Ghosts were punished. Wicked kings got their comeuppance. There was justice, eventually, even if your real-life lord could raise your taxes on a whim. In the stories, karma was a beast with iron claws and perfect timing. And when the story ended, when the dragon was slain or the thief was redeemed, you felt something weird: closure. Scary as they were, these stories offered structure: a beginning, a middle, an end. Something your actual life, full of random plagues and freezing winters, didn't often give you. The tale ends, the fire has gone cold, the voice fades, someone snores, the world is dark once more. You turn over in the shared bed, heart pounding slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of the tale. Your imagination dances with witches, kings, and forest beasts. You feel oddly safe, because somehow, even the scariest story is better than the silence. So you're lying there, elbow to elbow with your little brother who smells like turnips and sheep. And the story tonight? It's about Saint Margaret, swallowed whole by a dragon, and bursting out with a cross in hand like some kind of holy action hero. You blink in the dark, wide-eyed, wondering how a cross can be that sharp. Yes, welcome to Saint Stories, the medieval bedtime equivalent of Marvel movies, if everyone was celibate and set on fire at the end. These tales were told especially in Christian homes, where children needed to learn two things fast: life is suffering, but if you behave, you get a crown in heaven and maybe your own stained glass window. But not all tales were religious. Oh no. Step into a peasant's hut in the French countryside, And you might hear about John the Clever, who outwitted a tax collector by pretending to be insane and throwing goat poop at his face. That's right, folk trickster tales, the bedtime equivalent of a medieval meme. The kind of story you got before bed depended a lot on who you were. If your family was wealthy, lucky you might be read tales from illuminated manuscripts by candlelight. Something poetic, something ancient, something with way too many names and zero fart jokes. But if you were a farmer's kid, a blacksmith's apprentice, a peasant trying not to freeze, your stories were oral, passed down generation after generation, twisted by time and local spice. Grandma's version of The Girl and the Bear might end with a wedding. Uncle's version, cannibalism. Same title, different trauma. Stories were customized, tailored, told differently for girls and boys, sometimes sweetened, sometimes sharpened. Girls were warned about men who appeared handsome and turned out to be literal devils. Boys were warned about forests that swallowed you if you disobeyed your father. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were training manuals disguised as dreams. Let's zoom out a bit. In Germany, bedtime might involve a run-in with the Alp, a demon who sits on your chest while you sleep. Basically, sleep paralysis, but with a medieval hat. In Ireland, you'd hear about changelings, fairy children swapped with real babies. Mothers were told to place iron near cradles, say prayers, and never leave the room during childbirth. And in Eastern Europe, the story of the Baba Yaga was whispered, an old witch with iron teeth in a house that walked on chicken legs. That's right, a poultry-based architectural nightmare. Each of these tales was born from local fears: the woods, the winter, death, disease, supernatural justice. In an age before science, storytelling was how people explained the unexplainable. Why did your cow die? A spirit cursed your barn. Why did your cousin vanish in the forest? The trees wanted a sacrifice. Why are you still awake at 3 a.m.? Okay, maybe that one's on you. Not all stories were grim. Some were ridiculous, funny, even gross, because laughter was just as necessary as fear. It let people exhale. There were stories of talking animals who outwitted their masters, of lazy sons who lucked into gold, of bumbling priests who got locked in privies and had to be rescued by nuns. Imagine being 8 years old, half asleep, and hearing, "And then the fox, dressed as a monk, farted so loud that the hunter thought it was thunder and ran away screaming." These tales weren't meant to scare. They were a kind of bedtime release valve, proof that stupidity could triumph, that poor people could win, that even the church had its fools. Comment below. If you had to choose, would you rather fall asleep to a ghost story or a tale about a farting fox? Here's something people forget. The kind of story you heard before bed shaped not just your dreams, but your worldview. If your last thought before sleep was that sinners punished by boiling in oil, you might grow up cautious, devout, maybe a little anxious. But if your last thought was a clever girl outsmarting a greedy landlord, you might grow up a little braver, a little sharper. You'd start to believe that wit was a kind of magic. That's the real power of bedtime stories in the Middle Ages. They planted ideas, roots that grew into morality, resilience, identity. And long before schools or books or Instagram carousel advice posts, these were how humans learned how to be human. Here's the twist. Most of these stories, they were never written down. They lived in mouths, in breath, in firelight and laughter and fear. They changed a little each time. Some vanished completely. Some grew into fairy tales you'd recognize. Others are gone, lost to history, like footprints in snow. But for that one night, in that one room, surrounded by mud walls and mouse-nibbled blankets, the story was everything. It was warmth. It was truth. It was peace. It was how people, poor, cold, afraid, found a soft place to rest their minds. Even if it involved a shadow monster. By now, the wind outside is just a whisper, and the village is silent, but for the occasional hoot of an owl, or the snort of a pig settling into its straw. But inside the cottage, the world feels smaller, warmer. The fire's glow stretches long across the stone floor, and shadows dance gently up the wattle and daub walls. Someone adds a log to the fire. It cracks, pops, releases that slow curl of wood smoke and heat that makes your eyelids droop just a little more. And this is when the best kind of bedtime story is told. Not the scary ones, not the moral lessons, but the soft ones, the dreamy ones, the ones that blur into your dreams without you even realizing it. These were the stories that didn't shout or frighten or punish. They sang. A mother might tell of a girl who wept pearls when she spoke and smiled flowers when she laughed. A grandfather might hum the tune of a knight who wandered the world not to fight, but to find a melody no one else had heard. These stories drifted on gentle rhythm, filled with talking geese, sleeping princesses, clever donkeys, and distant mountains of glass. They weren't real. They weren't supposed to be. They were wishes, wishes told aloud, to children who'd never travel more than a few miles from home, to parents whose hands were blistered from plows and spinning wheels, to old ones who had seen too many winters. And for just a moment, the story lifted them all. You might be surprised to know that people often told the same stories over and over again. Little ones would beg for it. Tell me the one about the boy and the silver fish again. No, the one where the baker's cat sings songs to the moon. And they knew it by heart, every beat, every twist. But still, they wanted to hear it again. Why? Because it wasn't about what happened. It was about how it felt. The rhythm, the familiarity, the comfort. Like your favorite lullaby, or the hum of your mother's voice when she doesn't even realize she's humming. Some families even had their own versions of stories, passed down like heirlooms. Oh, in our story, the giant isn't cruel. He just wants someone to talk to. In our story, the moon falls in love with a shepherd girl. That was the beauty of the oral tradition. It lived. It adapted to the teller. It softened where it needed to. It made room for the listener. Sometimes the story wouldn't even end. It would just drift off, like the voice got too sleepy to finish. And then the boy followed the stars across the cold hills until he reached the tower where the wind whispered and the bells rang and silence. But not the frightening kind, the cozy kind. The kind of silence that's full with warmth and safety and firelight shadows. Because in that pause, in that unspoken ending, something magical happens. The story continues in your own mind. You begin to dream it. You, the listener, become the storyteller now. There's something intimate about telling stories by firelight. No microphones, no subtitles, no books to flip through. Just voices, faces, the flicker of flame. And in that moment, something unspoken is shared. Between the tired mother and her restless child. Between the grandfather and the wide-eyed boy with scabby knees. Between siblings curled up under the same patched blanket. The story isn't just entertainment, it's love. It's the closeness of voices in the dark. It's a world made safe through imagination. Because no matter how rough the day was, how heavy the work or cold the air, there was this shared quiet, this whisper of wonder, this ancient, beautiful ritual of telling each other, the world is big and scary, but you are not alone. Tonight, in our imagination, is just another night in medieval Europe. Nothing special. The bread was hard. Oh, the cow kicked over the milk pail. The youngest child refused to stop chewing on candle wax again. But somehow, just before the fire dies and the last body shifts under the hay blanket, someone says, "Let me tell you something." And for just a little while, the roof doesn't leak. The cold doesn't bite. The fear of wolves and war and winter goes quiet. And the room is full of geese with golden eggs, towers made of dreams, talking cats with riddles, and stars that can hear your wishes. And isn't that the whole point? Not to escape the world, but to carry a little bit of magic with you into it. Tonight, something feels off, Not bad, just different. The fire burns low but steady. The air is still. No wind howling outside. No dogs barking at shadows. But as you snuggle deeper into the blanket, a patchwork of rough wool, old linen, and maybe a bit of rabbit fur, you feel it. That faint tingle at the back of your neck. Like the night is listening. Grandmother hasn't spoken yet. Her knitting rests in her lap. Her fingers are still, but her eyes are fixed on the fire. No one says anything. Not yet. And then, quiet as a breath, she begins. There was once a village, much like ours, where the bells would ring at dusk, but no one ever saw who rang them. Not all bedtime stories were meant to soothe. Some were whispered like warnings wrapped in wool, not to scare you away from the dark, but to teach you how to respect it. Don't whistle after dark. Don't look into still water on a moonless night. If you hear footsteps behind you and you're sure no one's there, keep walking. Never turn around. These tales weren't full of monsters crashing through doors. They were subtle, quiet. A candle that snuffs itself out. A strange gift left on your windowsill. A traveler who knows your name but you've never seen before. And yet they were still told in the same warm corner of the room, beneath the same thatched roof, beside the same fire that crackled like it was trying to say something too. That was the magic of these tales. They made you feel safe and suspicious at the same time, as if the room was holding its breath with you. You're tucked in beside your cousin, both of you pretending to be braver than you are. You peek toward the hearth. Grandmother's voice lowers and her eyes sparkle, not with fear, but with something better. Mischief. She wants you to shiver a little. Not because the story is cruel, but because the tension is part of the comfort. It's like when a cat plays with a feather before the pounce. The suspense is the fun part. You're safe, but just barely. And isn't that more exciting than a simple happily ever after? In some homes, there were stories you didn't finish. You began them, maybe just a few lines, and then you let the silence carry the rest. The woman in white walks the marshes still, and if you hear her call, don't answer. Don't speak. Don't even breathe. Or what happens? You whisper. No one knows, grandfather shrugs. No one who answered ever came back. No gore, no chase scenes. Just a gap, a silence, a mystery that curls up beside you like a cat at your feet. You'd lie awake afterward, not out of fear but curiosity. What did happen? Was it real? Did someone once really hear her voice? The story doesn't give you answers, and that's why it sticks. Because in a world where so little was known about illness, death, stars, the soul, the unknown had its own kind of beauty. What kept it from being truly frightening was the room itself, the circle of light around the fire. That circle was sacred. Inside it, warmth, bread, wool, familiar faces, old hands stirring the coals. Outside it, the dark, the woods, the long, cold unknown. And between those two worlds, the story. The story acted like a bridge. It could reach into the dark, scoop up the shadows, and place them gently in the firelight where they couldn't hurt you anymore, where they could become part of the tale. Tame for just a moment. There's something else we don't often think about. Telling a bedtime story was a sign of trust. You didn't waste words in the medieval world. Life was too hard for nonsense. So when someone took the time to share a story with you, especially at night, it meant something. It meant, I want you to sleep peacefully. I want you to feel wonder. I'm going to put something soft between you and the hard edges of the world. Even if the story was about ghosts or witches, it was still a gift, wrapped in breath, handed down through darkness. The fire is low now. Someone turns over in their sleep. A soft sigh, a snore. Grandmother is quiet again. The tale has ended, or maybe it just faded into the walls. The last coals blink softly, like the eyes of a sleepy animal. You pull the blanket closer under your chin. You think about the bells no one ever rang, the woman in the marsh, the cat who sings to the moon. Outside, the wind picks up, a creak, a hush. But you're not afraid. Not really, because the story is still with you, like a cloak over your heart, like a lantern in your mind, like a friend who walked you to the edge of the woods and didn't let you go alone. The fire is nearly out now, but you're still awake. Your eyes are closed, your body is still, but your mind, it's spinning like a cartwheel in the mist. Because in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't just sleep, it was a door. And the story you heard before bed, that was the key. People believed that dreams were messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from devils, sometimes from something older, something watching, waiting, whispering in symbols. And so every bedtime story was also a seed, planted carefully in your mind to bloom in the garden of sleep. Let's be clear. Dreams were not just strange nighttime nonsense. They were important, they were studied, and sometimes they were feared. Monks and mystics wrote entire books on how to interpret dreams. What did it mean if you dreamed of birds, of fire, of a crumbling church tower? Did your dream mean you'd be blessed, cursed, that someone close to you was lying, that your crops would fail? In some villages, people would wake and immediately ask the room, "Did anyone dream of water last night?" Because in their world, a shared dream was not a coincidence. It was an omen. Imagine that. Waking up, turning to your sister in the straw bed beside you and saying, "I dreamed of a crow on a window. Was it near your house too?" Not creepy, not poetic, practical. Because dreams were treated like weather reports. Strange, unpredictable, but definitely worth listening to. Here's where it gets fascinating. Bedtime stories didn't just lead into dreams. Dreams came back around and shaped the stories. A child might wake from a strange dream, eyes wide, face pale, and by evening, that dream had become a tale retold by the fire. Last night, little Tom dreamed of the stag with 3 antlers again. It walked into the village square, and where it stepped, the earth turned to frost. By the next week, it wasn't Tom's dream anymore. It was the village's new story, a tale of prophecy. A tale that warned of a harsh winter, or perhaps a stranger arriving with hidden power. Story and dream were twin rivers, constantly crossing and feeding each other. And here's the real paradox. Medieval people both feared sleep and treasured it. They feared it because it made them vulnerable. To the cold, to illness, to spirits, to the dark thoughts in their own minds. But they also believed that sleep was sacred ground. That in those hours they might come closer to understanding divine mysteries than they ever could while awake. Think of it. The fire low, your heart beating slow, the world around you wrapped in silence. And suddenly, in your mind, a golden staircase rises from the earth. You climb it, each step a prayer. At the top, a voice you don't recognize says your name. And then, just as suddenly, you wake. This wasn't random. This wasn't dismissed. You might go straight to the village priest the next morning. You might fast, or celebrate, or warn others. Sleep was a sacred voyage, and the bedtime story was its map. Unlike us, each curled in our separate rooms with headphones in and doors shut, medieval families slept together. That meant dreams and stories were shared. You might wake in the middle of the night, sit up in the dark, and find your mother still awake. And she might whisper, "I dreamed your father wore a crown, but it was made of thorns." No one asked why she told you. Because in a world without alarms or clocks, people listened to what mattered. And dreams mattered. So did stories told in fragments, between waking and sleep. A brother might murmur a line from a tale you both loved. A sister might giggle in her sleep, whispering to someone only she could see. And in the morning, you'd all try to piece together what was real, what was dream, and what the story had become overnight. Sometimes, though, it worked the other way. You'd be asleep, peacefully adrift, and then wake suddenly. Not from a nightmare, From a memory, a line from last night's story, a detail you'd forgotten, a twist that didn't seem important at first, but now in the cold dark feels urgent. Wait, in the story, the child who heard the bell was never seen again. You stare at the ceiling, you listen, nothing. But the story, it stirs. It's no longer just a bedtime tale. It's alive in your head now. It wants you to remember. It wants you to finish it. And just like that, you're part of the story again. Then, as always, the sky begins to pale. Roosters crow, doors creak. The cottage fills with the smells of ash and damp straw and yesterday's bread. And the magic? It doesn't vanish. But it fades, just a little, like the warmth of a blanket pulled away. You remember pieces of the dream. You remember the story. But not all of it. Just enough to smile, just enough to wonder. And as you gather firewood or feed the chickens or kneel for morning prayer, there's a flicker of something strange still tucked behind your eyes. The quiet sense that you've come back from somewhere far away. That your mind crossed a threshold in the night and returned carrying something glowing. You think you're safe now. The fire's out, but your blanket is warm. You've heard the story, everyone's quiet, and sleep is just a few slow blinks away. But wait, your mother gets up, barefoot on cold floorboards. She moves to the doorway, not outside, just the threshold, and whispers something under her breath. She's not praying. She's warding. She ties a bit of red thread around the doorpost, just like she does every night. Why? Because once years ago, someone in the village didn't, and by morning 3 hens were dead, and all the milk turned to blood. So no one forgets anymore. You might think everyone in medieval times just went to bed with a psalm on their lips and a cross over their chest. And yes, sometimes they did. But alongside those holy words were older things, deeper things. Things that didn't make it into the church books, but made it into the bedrooms anyway. Charms carved into the bed frame. Bundles of dried rosemary or wormwood hung above the cradle. A knife hidden beneath the mattress to keep away the nightmare. No, not a mare like a horse, but mare like a spirit. A thing that sits on your chest while you sleep, whispering awful thoughts. People didn't always talk about these things during the day. But at night, when the windows were shut and the world was silent, superstition and comfort looked awfully similar. The cottage smells faintly sweet tonight. Not food, not flowers. Burnt sugar, resin. Nope, it's juniper, tossed into the hearth just before bedtime. Said to drive off sickness, or spirits, or bad dreams. No one's sure anymore. But you smell it, and you feel better. Scents mattered. They were the unseen walls people built between themselves and danger. Lavender near the window. Crushed sage rubbed into the wooden floor. Not just to smell nice, to keep things away, things with no name. Even the smoke was part of the ritual. A slow gray breath across the room, pressing the unseen to the corners. And here's a curious thing. Not all bedtime stories were just stories. Some were actually instructions, coded recipes for staying alive. Not obvious, not direct, but woven deep into the fabric of the tale. The girl who walked into the woods backwards to avoid the wolf. The man who only lit his lamp with wax from a candle that had never been used. The child who whispered 3 names into the well before they slept and never had bad dreams again. Listen closely and you'll find the rules. Always thank your house when you leave it. Never sleep with your feet pointed toward the door. And if you hear someone knock 3 times, but they don't say your name, don't open it. These weren't metaphors. They were survival techniques handed down like heirloom blankets, embroidered in story. There's a story in your family, passed quietly, never written, about a blanket. No one knows how old it is. It's thin, patched, barely warmer than a sigh. But it stays in the house. It's not used, it's not washed, it's just folded on the bottom shelf. If you ask about it, you're told, "That's the blanket we used the night of the white fog." What's the white fog? Ask when you're older. You don't. But one night, you wake to find that same blanket covering your feet. No one put it there. But it's warm, and you sleep deeply. And the next morning, your father says, "I saw someone at the window last night, but they didn't come in." And no one says anything else. If you grew up in a medieval cottage, you learn quickly. Not everything was talked about. But if you watched, you'd see things. A mother pressing bread to the wall and whispering to it. A brother leaving milk outside, even though it'll spoil. A grandmother brushing an invisible shape in the ashes before going to bed. No one explains. You don't ask. Because sometimes you don't want to know. Sometimes not knowing is what keeps the strange things away. All of this, the whispers, the herbs, the strange bedtime rituals, they should make you afraid, but they don't. Not really, because they're part of your world. They're the threads woven into the blanket of sleep, the cozy kind, the trusted kind. They tell you, the dark is vast, yes, but you're not helpless. You're not alone. You have the stories. You have the rules. You have the warmth of bodies beside you and the echo of old tales guarding your dreams. And in that liminal space, between firelight and night, between waking and sleep, you feel the most mysterious comfort of all. That maybe, just maybe, someone is watching over you. Something old, something gentle, something that has heard every story and keeps watch until the last ember dies. Okay, let's not pretend anymore. Not every bedtime story was meant to comfort you. Some were only told under specific rules. Never before midnight, never with strangers in the room, and never, ever spoken twice. They were called the firelight stories, not because they were told by the fire, but because they were told to the fire. The idea was simple. Some stories were dangerous to keep. So after they were told, you'd take a pinch of salt, toss it into the embers and say, "Let what was said burn clean." That was it. The ritual, the closing, and it mattered. Because if you didn't, if you let the story linger in the walls, in your dreams, in your mouth, it would grow roots, twist, return. People didn't write these tales down. They couldn't. The moment ink hit page, something went wrong. Pens snapped, candles blew out. One scribe reportedly lost hearing for 3 days. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one dared try again. You want an example? All right, but don't blame me if your lights flicker. There was one story, told only once a year during the coldest night, about a woodcutter's wife who could hear people's thoughts after eating a white mushroom found only beneath trees struck by lightning. At first she used it kindly, helped her neighbors, knew when her husband was lying. But then she started to hear thoughts no one had spoken. Thoughts not human, thoughts from beneath the floorboards. And when she whispered those words aloud, she forgot her own name. That's where the story ends. No lesson, no closure. Just a warning, don't eat what grows in silence. So who passed these tales down? Every village had one, or two if it was lucky. Someone with a memory like dried honey, sticky, slow, unshakable. Not a priest, not a scholar. Often it was an old widow or a half-blind spinner who muttered to herself. And you wouldn't ask for the story outright. You'd wait. You'd sit quietly, help with the firewood. And if she thought you were ready, she'd lean in, eyes like candle flame, and begin, "This one doesn't belong to me." But here's the deal. These stories always came with a price. Sometimes the teller would ask for food, or silence, or a promise. Don't repeat it until your hair turns gray. Tell it only if the wolves return. Say my name if you survive your dream. And here's the thing. Everyone who heard those stories, everyone remembered them. Not like normal memories, not like what you ate last night. These stories were like fire under the skin. They came back when the room got too quiet. when the snow fell a little too softly, when your dreams grew teeth. So why tell these stories at all? Why pass them down if they frightened children, bent sleep into something brittle, and made the fire crack in strange ways? Because sometimes fear protects you. These tales were warnings wrapped in magic. They told you how to behave when no one's watching, what not to say in the woods, how to tell if your reflection is too still, what gifts not to accept, and from whom. They were spooky, yes, but they were also shields, armor, ancient wisdom in wool clothing. Now imagine this. It's the dead of night. You're half awake, the fire is low, and someone, you don't know who, leans close and begins a story. Their breath smells like smoke and something older. Their voice is slow, cold, gentle, and they say, "This one's only meant to be told when you're alone." Would you listen? Would you lean closer? Would you remember to toss salt in the flame afterward? Because if not, well, you'll know in your dreams. Don't worry, you're here. You're warm. You've got your blanket. The fire might be dying, but the coals are still glowing, and no one's knocked 3 times at your door. Yet. So rest easy. Maybe you'll dream of golden mushrooms and singing trees and stories too old to end. Maybe you'll forget the details by morning. But maybe, just maybe, you'll wake with one sentence echoing in your head, one line, from a voice you've never heard before. And you'll whisper it to yourself before breakfast, not knowing why. Let what was said burn clean. The last tale has been told. No one speaks, not for a long time. The room is full of the kind of silence that only stories can leave behind. Not empty, but heavy, glowing, filled with images you can't unsee. The woman in the fog, the bells, no one rings. The child who spoke in her sleep and never spoke again. And you lie there, eyes open, staring into the soft dark above you. Not afraid, not really, but changed. As if part of you is still sitting by the fire, listening. The cottage is asleep now, all of it. The walls, the floorboards. Even the fire has gone quiet, buried beneath its own ash. But here's the thing about nights like this. They remember. The stones remember the stories told in front of them. The rafters remember laughter, and the sound of breath holding through a twist in the tale. And in the quiet, you feel it. Not a presence, not quite, but a sense, a gentle hum in the stillness, like the story itself is curling up to sleep beside you. In our modern world, we fall asleep to phones and playlists and screens dimmed to amber. But here, in this imagined, remembered medieval world, you fall asleep to story, to the rhythm of a voice you love, to the hiss of the fire dying down, to the smell of wood smoke and beeswax in old earth. And above all, you fall asleep with the sense that you've just touched something old, older than cities, older than kings, older than paper, the kind of magic that exists only between the last word of a story and the first breath of a dream. So you close your eyes, you let go, you drift, you fall, softly, slowly, into the deeper part of night. But something stays awake, the story. It lingers just behind your thoughts, weaving itself into your dreams. You'll wake up different, just a little, like you've walked through a hidden door no one else saw. And when the sun returns and the fire is lit again, and the world calls you back to tasks and chores and duties, the story will still be there, in the corner of your eye, in the hush before sleep, in the strange way a candle flickers when no one's near. That's how it works, you know. Real stories don't end, they shift, they settle in, they wait. Maybe you'll tell one of them again, someday, to someone younger, to someone afraid of the dark. Or maybe to yourself when the world feels too sharp, too loud, too fast. And when you do, when your voice drops low and the fire crackles just right, and the silence leans in to listen, you'll know what those old villagers knew all those centuries ago, that stories aren't meant to vanish. They're meant to watch over us, even after we close our eyes. And now, the fire is gone, just a faint orange pulse in the ash. The room is dark, quiet. Even the walls seem to be asleep. If you're still listening, tucked under your blanket, eyes heavy, heart calm, then you've made it. You've walked the winding path of bedtime as it once was. Before books, before lullabies, before nightlights and podcasts. You've felt what it meant to find peace, not through silence, but through story. To wrap yourself in mystery and myth like a second blanket. To drift off knowing that something ancient and kind was keeping watch. So now, let go. Let the story carry you wherever it needs to go. Let the embers glow behind your eyes. Let the dream begin. And if you wake with a strange image in your mind or a name you've never heard on your tongue, don't worry. It's just the story coming back for you. Sleep well, dream deep, and I'll meet you again by the fire